Like promised last week, we're taking a short break from the Gospel of John, and we're going to be covering an Old Testament book. Maybe not all of it, but certainly a portion of it. We're going to be going through the book of Daniel. And so, right off the bat, I want to invite us to go to the book of Daniel. If you just kind of open up in the middle section of your Bible, you'll find yourself in the Psalms, and after a few books, you kind of see Isaiah and Jeremiah. It's past that. You'll see a book called the book of Daniel. So we'll go there. We're going to be covering the whole first chapter this morning. Usually when we start a new series, we have kind of an introduction, a context to the setting of where this is taking place. And we're going to do that, but we're going to do that by just diving right into the text, because the text will be a good start, and it kind of gives us the context of where we are. And so I'm going to give us a few more moments to find ourselves to the book of Daniel. We're going to be, like I said, reading the first chapter, so we'll start right at verse 1. All right, I'll take that silence as we're all there. Let me read for us that first verse, and we'll stop. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Now, who is this Jehoiakim, king of Judah? But I would say what is more important is, who was the father of Jehoiakim? Well, the father of Jehoiakim was none other than the great reformer, King Josiah. Now, why do I call this king the great reformer? Well, to do that, I have to give us a short, brief history through the kings of Israel and Judah. If you guys remember, we went through the book of 1 Samuel, and in the book of 1 Samuel, we were able to see in great detail the transfer of the kingdom from King Saul, Israel's first king, to the authority and the kingship of King David. We got to see that in detail. Now, David was a man whom God described himself as being a man after God's own heart. And so you would think after the kingship has been restored to the kingship of David that everything would be dandy, everything would go well. But you guys know, for those who know, that it gets pretty bad pretty fast. Even in David's days of ruling, due to his own sinfulness, they're going to have this really messy royal family feud. And then things are going to take a turn for the worse when his son, Solomon, becomes king. You guys know Solomon as being probably the wisest king of all the kings of Israel. Yet, when he becomes king, he turns into a folly, a devastating sin of having 700 wives and 300 concubines, and they would lead his heart astray away from the Lord. And what Solomon is end up going to be doing is he's going to do that detestable thing of making altars to foreign gods, the gods who his wives worshipped. These places of worship being called the high places. And from here on out, there's going to be a split in the kingdom of Israel. God's going to rip away 10 tribes, and he's going to give it to a man named Jeroboam. And Jeroboam, he's going to become king over those 10 tribes, also known as the kingdom of Israel, or the northern kingdom. The 2 tribes that are left, the remaining 2 tribes, will be still entrusted to the Davidic line, to Solomon's son, Rehoboam. And he's going to be king over what is known as the kingdom of Judah, or the southern kingdom. And from here on out, we have the separation of Israel into 2 kingdoms, kingdom of Israel and kingdom of Judah. And as we read on forward from the split, it's kind of like reading the book of Judges again. I don't know if you had the opportunity to read any of the Kings or the Chronicles, but you just see this cycle, both kingdoms drifting further and further away from the Lord, with every king, with every generation, seemingly getting a little bit more perverse, a little bit more perverse. Now, the southern kingdom, they'll fare just a little bit better, but not by much. There's going to come a point where Israel, the northern kingdom, they're going to be so opposed to their God that they will reject anything that the prophets of God tell them. And just like it was promised, the Lord is going to give them away to what they desire. Kind of like the hardness of heart that Pastor Eddie talked about last week. That when the heart hardens itself, the Lord will say at a certain point, have your way then. Go after your idols. And he does just that to the kingdom of Israel. Go, have your idols, serve your idols. They're not really gods at all. So what happens to a nation that has no God? Well, it just becomes a group full of sinful people being led by a sinful man. And what's going to happen ultimately is that the Assyrians are going to come and they're going to take Israel off into exile. That is the exile of the northern kingdom. How did the southern kingdom fare? What do you do when you see someone playing with a hot pan and they get burned? You shouldn't touch it. But the southern kingdom, they do exactly the same thing. After the northern kingdom is put off into exile, things are going to take a real turn for the worse when a king named Manasseh of the kingdom of Judah, when he takes over. And it's written that he does more idolatry, more perverse things than any of the other kings of Judah had done before him. And also, much innocent blood will be shed during his time as king in the kingdom of Judah. So much so that God will determine, Judah, you too will go into exile. Daniel 1:1 tells exactly that time that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar has come and has carried off the kingdom of Judah into exile. Now, this short history lesson came about when I said, more important than Jehoiakim, who is mentioned here in verse 1, is his father, King Josiah. Because, like I said, things got real bad for Judah. And you thought, oh, this is game over after King Manasseh, who was the most evil king out of the kingdom of Judah. And you think they're going to put into exile right away? But surprisingly, from this evil king's line comes a grandson of King Manasseh, and his name is Josiah. And Josiah starts to reign at a young age of 8 years old. And though he had a sinful and an evil grandfather, and he had a sinful and an evil father, he is going to turn to the Lord, and he's going to wipe clean the house of Judah from all of its idolatry. This is the king under whom you might know, where the high priest, when he's sent to the temple, to the house of the Lord, to take care of some things with the treasuries and the offerings, the high priest stumbles upon essentially the Torah, or their Bible, the law of God. And they're like, what is this? They read it to themselves. They read it in front of King Josiah, and they are shocked because all the things that the book of God, the book of the law, had told them not to do, they've been doing. A lot of it. They look around. Yep, idols. Temples for the idols. Yep. Cult prostitution. Check. Child sacrifice. Check. Necromancers. Check. Diviners. Check. High places. Check, 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 check. All the things that the Word of God had prescribed them not to do, they've been doing. It's like going to the doctors and finding out that all the things that you shouldn't be eating, well, that's your main diet. This event tells us something really sad about the reality in Josiah's time. Not to mention all the perversities and the sinfulness that must have been rampant during this time, but this means that somewhere along the line, the kingdom of Judah, spiraling from bad to worse, had gotten to a place where they stopped reading God's words. They didn't even know that it existed. The high priest didn't know that it existed. That means they didn't know their left from their right. Their moral compass was off sync, and their souls were running dry, generation after generation. We can probably take a moment to kind of reflect upon our own hearts as well. Is the Word of God in my life? Or are we too like the nation of Judah? What's worse about this situation is they would have certainly read from the Torah, Deuteronomy 28, a chapter that is devoted to mentioning all the blessings for obedience, but also a long discourse about the curses for disobedience. And among all the terrible things that were written about what would happen if they disobeyed, they certainly would have read verse 36, which reads like this, Deuteronomy 28:36. The Lord will bring you and your king, whom you set over you, to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone. They saw this. They saw this when the brothers to the north, when the kingdom of Israel, when they were carried off into exile by the Assyrians. And so in the moment of fear, what is going to happen to us? We've transgressed the Lord so many years. What does Josiah do? He will reform Judah in a way that has never been reformed before. A revival of sorts happened in the nation of Judah. Josiah, he's going to go to town. He's going to tear down anything that had anything to do with idol worship. All its altars, all its utensils, all the things that were dedicated to foreign gods, he's going to burn and throw away. His zeal for keeping God's law would even take him to the northern kingdom. When they're off in exile, he's going to go to the cities of Samaria, and he's going to tear down all the idol places of worship. It is written of Josiah in 2 Kings 23, 25 through 27. Listen to how 2 Kings 23 describes Josiah. It says this concerning him. Before him, there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses. Nor did any like him arise after him. Still, verse 26, the Lord did not turn from the burning of his great wrath, by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel. And I will cast off this city that I have chosen, Jerusalem, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there. But the Lord, moved by Josiah's love for God's laws, he will say, Josiah, I will not do this during your time, but during the time of your son. And Jehoiakim is that son. And Daniel 1:1 is pointing to that same Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim was a king. Though he descends from Josiah's line, he does evil in the eyes of the Lord. That's kind of the context we're in right now. That's the book of Daniel. The southern kingdom being carried away into exile into the land of Babylon. Let's move on to verse 2. Daniel chapter 1 verse 2 reads like this. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. Whose hand? Nebuchadnezzar's hand. With some of the vessels of the house of God. And he, Nebuchadnezzar, brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Now, you're going to see this a few times in this chapter, so let us see it. That though Judah has failed and has been exiled into a foreign land under a foreign king, this is not the doing of that foreign king, Nebuchadnezzar. Though history books might say otherwise, we get the insider scoop. Who's in charge here? No, it's not Nebuchadnezzar. This is not concerning Nebuchadnezzar's might. This is the Lord's might. He raised Nebuchadnezzar to punish Judah. He gave, it says in verse 2, he gave Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hands, as our text would tell us. This is an overarching theme that you must catch in this book. This book ultimately is not about Daniel nor his three friends, although they will be characters, central characters in it. But it is about the God behind Daniel. But not only behind Daniel, but we see that God is the God who moves globally. He is the Lord. There is none other than him. Everything else are gods made out of wood and stones. Although that's the reality, although that's the truth given to us by God's word, we see that in the same verse, earthly kingdoms will always try their best to make it seem like they are the ones who are in control. What does Nebuchadnezzar do? We see Nebuchadnezzar carry some of the vessels from the house of Yahweh, from the house of the Lord, and carries it to the treasury of his god, the god of the Babylonians, Marduk. This being an ancient Near East tradition that when your enemies were desecrated, you would take the holy things that were dedicated to your enemies' gods, and you would carry them and you would put them in a submissive position in your own temple of your own God to demonstrate your own God's dominance. It's a very material and a tangible way of trying to symbolize your God's dominance, but the reality here is this is still only the manipulation of man's hands. You see that it's the people who go in, they carry the vessels, they carry it to the temple of Marduk, and they put it in submissive formation so that it would be underneath a man-made statue. We know that through God's law, this exile happened because God had warned about it. God had decreed it. And Yahweh, the only God, is now allowing it to happen. God is fully in control. That is also part of the context. That is also the overarching theme of this book and also of our lives. We move on. We're going to read a larger chunk as we get introduced to our characters. We move on. We're going to read verse 3 through 7. Follow along with me with your eyes. It reads like this. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. And we stop there. Who are these youths? First off, many commentators place the age of these youth to about 14, 15. Their backgrounds were of nobility and some even royal family background of Judah, and they are described as being skillful, knowledgeable, and competent. And so the strategy of the Babylonians were to train the cream of the crop of their enemies and make them your servants. It's good for morale of those that they conquer, and it's good for your kingdom. You have all these skilled people from all over the world now serving you. So here's the program. They're going to be allotted a daily portion from the king, and they're going to be educated for the king so that they could be used someday by the king of Babylon. And don't be thrown off by the language that they got the food that was at the king's table, and they got to drink the wine from the king's table. This wasn't a luxurious exchange program with Babylon. Don't forget that these youths, these teenagers, were separated from their parents. They were separated from their family, their country. They've been taken away from their homes. Now they're being branded new names. And now they're considered the property of the king of Babylon. This is human trafficking. But who really owns Daniel? Who really owns Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Because once again, the kingdoms of the world will try to do their best to make it seem like they own you, that you belong to it, that it holds you in their possession, that it has true power. but once again, only seemingly so. We're going to read the next handful of verses, and we're going to see who Daniel and his friends truly belong to. Read with me from verse 8 to 16. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. Now, all you vegetarians in the house, don't get so excited, okay? Don't get so excited. This is not about what diet is better than the other, okay? And let me make my case for that. We start off verse 8 with a contrast word. We start with the word but. Whenever you read the word but, you have to read what it's contrasting itself against. So you read the preceding verses carefully. So what is it contrasting? Well, we know that the preceding verses lists the efforts of the kingdom of Babylon, how they're going to try to indoctrinate these youths into their way of eating, into their language, into their identity, pretty much their culture, so that they may be trained to become youths who will be fit to serving their God. And then we get the word but. So it's not a but that contrasts only food, but this process of indoctrination. The kingdom of Babylon wanted to make them speak just like them, to eat just like them, to identify just like them, so that they can serve their king and their God just like them. But Daniel resolved not to take the king's food or the wine he drank. I think there's more going on here than just a simple Levitical dietary obligation that Daniel is holding on to. It certainly could have been just for the fact that the food was not kosher. Perhaps it was a cut of meat that was not kosher, like pork, or meat with fat still on it, or meat with blood still in it. Or perhaps Daniel felt that the food coming from the table of this Gentile king would have been most definitely defiled in idol worship. Back in the ancient Near East, almost certainly in the nation of Babylon, meat would have been first dedicated to the household gods before being taken. Wine, which is not prescribed as being unclean in Levitical law, well, it would have been defiled because these nations, they would have also poured out their drink offerings of wine as libation, as an offering to their gods, to their deities, before consuming it. But if this passage is only about dietary conditions, did Daniel keep his vegetarianism for his 70-plus years in Babylon? I don't know. It seems like the text is trying to say that during this time, during this 3 years of indoctrination process, Daniel is going to resolve himself not to be fully indoctrinated. I think the text is suggesting that. I think what's going on here is that Daniel, in his resolve not to take from the king's table during these 3 years, is to make an outward declaration of what is going on internally, kind of like baptism. He's saying, you cannot indoctrinate out of me, Yahweh. He's my only Lord. My allegiance is to him. Sure, I'll get trained. Sure, I'll learn your language. Sure, I'll even kind of learn your culture. But at the heart, I have only one king. I've only one Lord that I will bow my knees to, and it's the Lord. I serve him only. This is Daniel waging war back on this spiritual and cultural indoctrination that is being thrown on him. It's a subtle yet holistic indoctrination, isn't it? You start with the food, you start with the culture, you get with the language, you learn their humor, you learn what everything is about, and then, oh, their God makes sense. Just like how Solomon was indoctrinated slowly but surely by his 700 wives and 300 concubines who worshiped foreign idols. Daniel is making a stance from the get-go. No, my life, my allegiance belongs to the Lord and to him only. And as we further study this book, you know that Daniel and his friends, they're going to make multiple stands. Not only of not eating, but putting their life on the line. In verse 9, we get another statement of God's sovereignty throughout all of this. It says that God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. God is still the puller of strings here. God is leading Daniel and his three friends through this resolve. Once again, don't miss this overarching theme. Kingdoms of this world will try to make you think that they are in power, but like I said before, only seemingly so. Our God, who is the only God, he's the one who is truly in power. I think also there's a lesson for us to be learned here in the passage that we read. Though it is God who gives favor to Daniel in the sight of his overseers, Daniel still needed to act. He still needed to act in courage. He still needs to ask his steward not to be given this defiled food, or not to be defiled by the food, by what everyone else is doing. And he also lays out a logical plan. Test us in this way. For 10 days, we will eat vegetables and water, and after those 10 days, very scientific, observe us, observe our appearance, and then you decide. A lot of the times, many times, I don't know about you guys, but many times for me, I have godly aspirations, but sometimes they just stay inside because I'm afraid that if I actually took courageous action, that I might be met with opposition, that I might be met with disappointment. I have fear. Fear of my, not me, I wrote non-believing bosses, but I have a believing boss. Yeah. But perhaps you might be in fear of your non-believing bosses. Perhaps you might be in fear of your non-believing friends and family, what they'll think of you. But we see here, at least in this example, the opportunity to honor God goes hand in hand with a courageous stand. Not only of the heart's resolve that only you can see, but of outward action that others can see and can get on board with. So Daniel makes the appeal, test us in this way, and we know what happens. After the 10 days, what's the result? The appearance of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Their appearance were better and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. The result is contrary to common wisdom. You would think that eating what comes from the king's table will be more nutritious. But here, what's going on here is not just about diets and food. There's a God thing happening here. When you resolve to honor God, the result is sometimes illogically on your side. Because God, He is God. For discipleship training group, for DT, we've been reading through from Genesis cover to cover, and we just kind of finished 2 Kings. And I want to share an example. As we were reading through 2 Kings, we were reading about a prophet named Elisha. Elisha, who received a double portion from Elijah. And Elisha, if you ever read through the book of 2 Kings, he does some cool things. For an example, he's living with the prophets, and it was during a famine time, and he says, hey, go make some soup. And so one of the prophets, he goes out to the wilderness, and he cuts up all these, it says roots or vines, and he brings it back, and he kind of makes a soup out of it. Doesn't sound that good. After it's completed, one of the prophets tastes it, and he says, oh, man of God, there's death in the pot. Pretty much meaning it's poisonous. And so what does Elisha do? He throws some flour in there, and the poison goes away, and so they could eat the soup. Kind of humorous, but kind of cool. Another instance, the prophets, they're thinking, we need bigger lodging. And so let's go cut down some wood, let's go logging by the Jordan and build ourselves a bigger shelter. Elisha, come with us. They go. They're logging, and one of the prophets, as he was logging, he slips and throws the axe into the Jordan, and he goes, my master, it was borrowed. They're kind of like kids, okay? And so Elisha comes over, and he says, where did you throw it, or where did you lose it? He points, and Elisha throws a stick, and all of a sudden, the axe head floats, and he retrieves it. Another instance, they only had 20 fresh loaves of bread, but 100 prophets come in, and Elisha says, go feed them. And the prophets are like, we can't, we only have 20 loaves. But once again, they're able to feed. And it's so cool. It's like living with like a superhero. Like, I have this problem, fix it. Elisha comes, okay. Oh, what are we gonna do? Elisha comes, he fixes it. And I was thinking, I was like, what's the purpose of this? What am I supposed to get? What am I supposed to derive? A Christian in 2023, what am I supposed to learn? I certainly don't live with an Elisha. And then I share this, and one of our brothers in DT, he was telling us about a meme that he saw. I know, different generation, right? You would think he's like, oh, yeah. Pastor Eddie would have been like, well, Tim Keller says. No. This guy, he was like, well, let me share with you a meme that I just saw. And this meme's kind of funny, and it's kind of cool. I hope you don't mind. And the meme was this. A Christian, he dies and he goes to heaven, and he's all excited because he wants to ask Moses, hey, Moses, what was it like to see God face to face? And the response is, Moses is equally excited, and he says to that Christian, how was it, Christian, to have God live inside of you? That's so cool. I just got the shivers again. I got the shivers last time I heard it. So cool. I do live with a superhero. I do live with one who is greater than Elisha. And I started, and it put me in a new perspective, and I just try to think about my past and so many ways where I felt like I witnessed miracles in my life. Now, it might not be miracles to you, but they were miracles to me. And I know you know what that means, right? You have a hurdle, you have a hardship, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And it might be as simple as, I don't know how I'm going to eat lunch later because I'm broke. But some way, somehow, as you look back retrospectively, the Lord pulled you through. And you, at that moment, it was a miracle, wasn't it? I hope you do, saint. Because your God communes with you. Oh no, He never lets go. He's with you. I hope your lives are full of those stories. Now, why did I share that story? Because here, when we honor God, sometimes something that is illogical is on our side. I choose to eat vegetables and water, end result, I'm better in appearance and fatter. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. But to them, to them it was. They looked healthier. That's what the text is trying to get at. And I know when you put the Lord above what the world says you should do, I know it's not you're richer and you're prettier, or you land that job, or you get married, or you have a child. Sometimes it's more suffering. Right? I'm sure some of you guys have been there. And you're like, what is going on? I chose to honor you. It's illogical in that sense. But that deep communion with the Lord, His whispers of encouragement. I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of you, daughter. You can't trade that for any gold. It's illogical sometimes to honor the Lord, but it pays off in a way that only you know because your God lives in you. We're going to finish out our passage, verse 17 through 21. And it's kind of a summary passage of what the sojourning of these 4 individuals will be like in Babylon. Read with me, verse 17. Let's finish out our chapter. It says this, "As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king," which means they served the king. "And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all the kingdom. And Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus." These ending verses writes for us a hopeful start to an otherwise grim situation for the kingdom of Judah. It is written that God gave them, once again here, God's sovereign, God gave Daniel and his 3 friends learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in visions and dreams. But just because it says that God gave them those things, it doesn't mean that these 4, they just chilled and downloaded knowledge. No, they went through the training. They went through the courses. They went to language class. They learned their language and culture. A faithful follower of Christ is always faithful to the tasks at hand because they understand that circumstances are not dictated by externalities, but ultimately God's in control. God sets up authorities in our lives. So they were trained, and we see that they were found to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters. And Daniel, it being cited that he was here until the 1st year of King Cyrus, it pretty much means he lived his entire life, 70 plus more years, here in the land of Babylon. There's chapter 1. Now, how do we bring Daniel chapter 1 to us? I think there are many implications, and we touched and brushed upon some of them throughout as we read. But I want to hone in on 2 concepts. Both of these concepts having to do with plans. First one is plan A. Now, I'm using that like, if plan A doesn't go right, go to plan B type of plan A. Except for our God, he doesn't have plan B. He's always on plan A. Remember how I said that we end on a hopeful start to an otherwise grim situation for Daniel and his friends? Because of the nature of how we've heard the story of Daniel might be kind of like in Sunday school setting. It's always kind of more of an upbeat, triumphant, victorious story, right? But let me remind you, in the historical sense for the kingdom of Judah, this was disaster. As we went through the history earlier, things got so bad in the kingdom of Judah that they did not know that they even had the book of the law of God. This was God giving Judah over to their hardness of heart and them receiving the due punishment for the wickedness of idolatry and the shedding of innocent blood. This, like I said earlier, this was no glorious exchange program in the land of Babylon. This was Judah being sacked by a foreign king, their temple being desecrated by a foreign god. Judah had become a war-torn nation with their people being chained and dragged to a foreign country as plunder. This is not a bright situation. Yet, life is just getting started. Though God's people have entered into punishment and banishment, there is still purpose within the punishment. There's purpose for Daniel there's purpose for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. God is still at work. And as you read, it seems less of a punishment and more of a discipline. And as we said last week, the Father, our God, he disciplines those whom he loves. He is disciplining his son, the nation of Judah. Oh no, he did not let go. There's purpose here. Do you guys remember when Israel first came out of the land of Egypt? You know, it was decreed to the first generation, you will not enter into the promised land, because if you guys know, Moses sent out 12 tribes into the land of Canaan, the promised land. 10 of them came back with a fearsome news. Oh, they're so big, and there are warriors, there are giants in that land. We seem like grasshoppers to them. And this spread fear to the Israelites, so much so that the Israelites said, we're not going. Why'd you bring us here, Moses? To die? So God decreed that this generation, the generation that had seen the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, all the miracles of manna and water from the stone, from the rock, they will not find rest in the promised land. Except for Joshua and Caleb, the other two spies who came with favorable reports that reflected not who they were, but it reflected who their God was. Now, I'm mentioning this because when I first read this story, when I was in high school, I was thinking, goodness, what a life for the first generation. Their purpose is to die off. What a lame life. What a miserable life. But if you've ever read through the book of Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you realize that these 40 years were not with, I always do double negatives. They were purposeful. I was about to say not without purpose, but it had purpose, those 40 years. It wasn't just aimless wandering. Though if you see their path, it seems like aimless wandering. No, there was purpose. We get it directly from God's mouth. In Deuteronomy 8:2, he says this concerning their time in the wilderness. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. They didn't trust their God. They were not ready to go into the promised land, because you know what they were going to do when they go into the promised land? You know how they were going to dispossess these nations? They were going to walk around walls. They were going to send 300 to fight the thousands. It was all obedience to amazing tasks, but tasks that would reflect God is doing the fighting. It required faith, which Israel lacked. This time in the wilderness was the training of Israel, God's son, to humble him, and so that they would trust in their God. Their parents, they weren't just there to die off. They were there to train their sons and their daughters in the ways of the Lord. They were there to teach young men to become warriors who will dispossess the Canaanites. There was purpose in those 40 years. In the same way, Judah, the kingdom of Judah had failed and are entering to punishment from their God, exile and banishment from the land. But God has not abandoned them. There is purpose. You will see throughout this book that through simple obedience of these four brothers, they will testify to the greatness of God in this massive land of Babylon. You guys have to know, Babylon was kind of the empire. It didn't just take over Judah, it took over pretty much the ancient Near East. And Nebuchadnezzar, he will be humbled as he sees the obedience of these four brothers. Even in the midst of Judah's discipline, there is purpose, a purpose to glorify their God. I want to remind us, God is always on plan A, and you are still a part of God's plan A. I think a lot of times we can have this mentality, well, it could have been that. It should have been that. It would have been that if I did this, if I did that differently. That's our creaturely mindset. In how God shows himself, there's one plan. It doesn't deviate. Don't take my word. Take the words of God as he declares himself in Isaiah 46, 9 through 10. For I am God, and there's no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. He's written out the end from the beginning, and it will not be thwarted by your mistakes. You are on God's A plan. Some of you guys are coming here and you guys are thinking, I've done some regrettable things in my life, and I don't think they'll ever be reversible. I never said that things will get reversed. Sometimes we will live with the consequences of our sin. But you are still in God's A plan. Plan A. He is still working. And what he requires of us, simple obedience to what he's doing. Getting on board with what he's doing. Point number 2 that I would like to highlight for us is just the flip of those words. So the first point was plan A, how you are on God's plan A. The flip is a plan. We need a plan. Though we know that God is working for his glory and he will invite you to obedience to his plans, we as creatures, we don't see tomorrow, so we need a plan. How are we going to obey? The title of today's message is Radical Sojourners. The word sojourning, getting at the fact that it's not our permanent place of abode. Though Daniel will kind of live out his life in Babylon, his mentality was never, Babylon is my home. Because Babylon worshipped a pagan god, an idol. His allegiance was to Yahweh. In the same way, we know as we live here on this earth, we will never call this earth fully our home because this world runs to a different drumbeat. It marches through all different types of voices, but we have the commandments of God. We live here, we learn here, we work here, but we will never bow down to the God of this world. There's a time coming, and perhaps you've already felt the heat of it, when we will have to stand and say, I will not defile myself to the indoctrination of the culture of this world. To serve its food, metaphorically speaking, to speak its language, metaphorically speaking, and to serve its king, metaphorically speaking. But I will resolve. And that resolution might be different for many of you. Perhaps some of you have already resolved and had to stand for God's laws. And it made you go through a time of suffering and opposition. But this resolve doesn't happen without a plan. Matt Chandler had famously said once, no one stumbles upon godliness. We don't just live our lives without a plan and a course and just think, oh, I'm holier now. No one denies sin by chance. When that temptation is right in front of you, well, let's see what happens. You're going to sin. No one remembers the words of God by downloading it. No. You exercise it into your heads. You memorize it. You meditate on it day and night so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. We need a plan. Where am I getting this? Remember Josiah, the great reformer? Those years of coming back to the Lord, Judah as a nation had its purpose. If you remember, Daniel and his friends were about 14, 15, old enough to have seen some of the residue, some of the effects of the reforms that Josiah had implemented in Judah. There was training of God's word there, and they took that training seriously. And even though after Josiah's death there would be sinful kings, they said, I will resolve to serve my God, Yahweh. So that when rubber hit the road and they found themselves in a foreign nation under a foreign king, it was natural. I do what I've been doing. I resolve to serve my God instead of the God of this world. Perhaps this planning was even implemented before their time. Let me share with you the meaning of the names of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel's name means God is judge. Hananiah's name means Jehovah is gracious. Mishael's name means who is what God is. Pretty much saying there's none like him. Azariah's name means the Lord helps. Even more so than these four brothers, their parents named their sons thinking, I'm going to plan to have these guys follow the Lord. I'm sure they prayed for them. They raised them up in the ways of the Lord during the time of reforms. Not that everything goes according to how we want to parent our children, but here, there was a heart. There was a resolve that we can see even from the parents' generation. And thankfully, by grace, that resolve was kindled in the hearts of these four brothers, and they practiced it. We become what we practice, saints. You guys know this. When the rubber hits the road, our habits come out as our natural response. Let us resolve like the brothers that we read about. Let us hide God's word in our hearts so that when it is time, and oh goodness, I think it's going to be sooner than later, that we will all stand and say, we resolve to serve our Lord, Jesus Christ, him and him only. Pray with me in a word of prayer. Father, we want to thank you that you have given us an opportunity to go through this book, the book of Daniel. And as we kind of start off by going through chapter 1, Lord, we are so thankful that you never let go, that you are sovereign still. In the midst of our failures, you are working out plan A. And I ask, Lord, that you would whisper into your sons and your daughters, what is that obedience that you are calling them to? Father, I know that we can make many justifications, but Lord, hit us with clarity to be able to know what is that tangible step that we need to take so that we would honor Christ more than our comfort, that we would honor Christ more than our dreams and our aspirations. Knowing all the while that as we look to the cross, you have our best interest in mind. You care about our 100% satisfaction. You care that we would have you as our treasure. Help us to see your wisdom. Help us to declare with delight and with joy, I will go your way. May this be the anthem of your people, not only this afternoon, but throughout this week. May we glorify you as we resolve. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you all.